Hi, welcome back to Deadly Affirmations, the video book. Today we're going to read the second part of chapter 10, and where two of our characters, Patience Murphy and Lee, the college student, are making dinner. If you're not hungry now, you will be by the time we're finished with this one. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Here we go. Patience threw away the rusty can and cleaned herself up. Then she checked on the crock pot. 25 minutes until dinner. She had just enough time to boil some water for the angel hair pasta, get out the Il Bastardo Sangiovese Chianti, $8 a bottle, and throw together some antipasto, a handful of pitted green and black olives, a little jar of marinated artichokes, and a long cocktail fork, 4 thin slices of that hard, dry Italian sausage soppressa veneta, a little tin of cherry pepper stuffed with the parmesan that her cousin Grace O'Malley had sent from Florence last Christmas, on a slightly tacky melamine platter that her mother had loved. The water was boiling, and Patience tossed in a handful of pasta and a couple of pinches of salt. She poured herself half a glass of Chianti and fished out one of the artichoke hearts from the jar on the platter. She popped the artichoke into her mouth, took a sip of wine, and closed her eyes, savoring the wonderful flavors. It was time to check on the pasta. Dinner was wonderful. After cleaning up and putting the leftovers away, Patience curled up in the living room with her Kindle, a sleazy little novel about zombies in Kansas. By the time she had read 50 pages, half the bottle was gone and she was ready for bed. Lee worked on her research until noon. She had read the article in the morning paper about the most recent murder, Mrs. Husted, and decided to search for unusual methods used by serial killers. After a morning of strangulations, disembowelings, drownings, stabbings, clubbings, and shootings, Lee had enough. She decided to go shopping and make dinner for her mom. Lee wasn't much of a cook, but she knew what she liked. She shopped for about an hour and bought everything that she would need. She walked back into her kitchen with 2 big shopping bags weighing her down. Time to get to work. First things first. Lee rinsed the bag of pinto beans in a colander in the sink and then put a big pot on the stove and filled it with water. Then she poured the beans into the pot with a handful of salt. She grabbed a big white onion, peeled it and cut it in half, tossing one half into the pot and dicing the other half for later. She would let the beans boil for about an hour and a half, hoping not to have to add much water. She washed her hands, made herself an Arnold Palmer, and went into the living room to put on some music. There was some wonderful pop on the station from Europe, up-tempo and just right for dancing, and Lee let herself jump around the living room for a few minutes before going back to her cooking. Lee got out the cutting board and cut 5 rashers of bacon into little pieces and a hunk of ham and 3 hot dogs into cubes. She chopped up a clove of garlic and half a bunch of cilantro and seeded and diced 2 ripe Roma tomatoes and a big fat jalapeno. She took the pepper grinder, a bottle of oregano, a bottle of paprika, a bottle of cumin, and the box of salt from the cupboard. Then she got out another good-sized metal pot, not quite as large as the one the beans were boiling in, and set it on another burner on the stove. She turned on the heat and waited a couple of minutes. Then she tossed in the bacon and let it cook in the bottom of the pot for about 5 minutes. When it was beginning to sizzle, she poured a package of chorizo out of the fridge, cut off the casing, and then added it to the pot. She stirred the spicy sausage around with a long metal fork for 5 more minutes until it was cooked, and then she added the ham and the hot dogs and the garlic and the spices. The cooking smelled so good that Lee could have just stood there and breathed it all in. But her mother would be home in an hour and would be hungry. She put the tomatoes, cilantro, half the onions she had diced, and the jalapeno into the pot and cooked it all for 5 more minutes. Finally, she added the cooked pinto beans and the water that they were cooked in to the pot full of meat and veggies and let it all boil for a while. As the beans mingled their flavor with the meats, vegetables, and spices, it was time to make the cornbread. Lee turned the oven to 450 and put a 9-inch cast iron skillet inside. She had about 15 minutes. She took 2 bowls from the cupboard, one large and one smaller. In the larger bowl, Lee whisked together a couple of cups of cornmeal and teaspoons of baking powder, baking soda, and salt. When it was thoroughly mixed, she whisked 2 eggs and 2 cups of buttermilk and then mixed the wet and the dry together in the larger bowl. She took a little pan and sautéed 2 ripe jalapenos that she had seeded and diced. By then the skillet was hot. Lee opened the oven, put on a pair of oven mitts, and pulled out the skillet and laid it on top of the stove. She had taken the little glass container out of the fridge that her mother kept bacon fat in and spooned a tablespoon of the greasy stuff into the skillet to melt and mingle with the peppers. Then she poured the batter into the skillet and put it back into the oven to bake. She turned down the burner for the beans and put a lid on the pot, taking a wooden spoon and trying a taste. Yum. The handle on the kitchen door turned and Lee's mother walked in. "Something smells wonderful," she said. "When's dinner?" Lee walked over and gave her mother a hug. "About 20 minutes, she said. "What would you like to drink? I'm having an Arnold Palmer." "Do we have any Corona left?" her mother asked. Lee smiled. "I'll check," and opened the fridge. "There's one left, just for you." "Great, I'll get out of these work clothes and be right back down," she said as she left the kitchen and went upstairs to her bedroom. Lee looked through the little window in the oven, but the cornbread wasn't quite ready yet. Lee walked back into the living room and changed the radio station to one that played 80s power ballads 24/7. It wasn't her favorite, but it wasn't bad, and her mother loved that stuff. Ann Wilson's magnificent voice was asking, "How do I get you alone?" as the piano slammed out the fading power chords. And just as the next song was beginning, with Bret Michaels strumming his guitar and singing "We Both Lie Silently Still in the Dead of the Night," her mother hurried down the stairs just in time to sing the chorus. "Every rose has its thorn," and Lee joined in. After the chorus, Lee had to check on the cornbread and left her mother singing along with Brett and Ricky and Bobby and Cece. Lee took the cornbread out of the oven and filled 2 bowls with the charro beans and then crumbled a couple of squares of cornbread and some raw diced onions over the beans. She put the bowls on the kitchen table along with 2 spoons, 2 napkins, a bottle of Cholula Picante, her mother's beer, and her Arnold Palmer. "Soup's on," she called.